and welcome to another episode of Hackers Misadventures in Scale Modeling. Today, I'm going to do something different. I was going to do another Curtiss aircraft, the XP-40Q, but I came across some information on my Facebook feed about restoration of a Vickers Vilderbeest. So I have like 3 videos here for you. One I got from Rex's hangar, I believe. Let me check it to make sure. No, Ed Nash's. Okay, it's Ed Nash's Military Matters on the Vickers Vilderbeest. Then we'll do the video on the restoration that's going on in New Zealand, and a little news story that would cover that. And then we'll, as normal, we'll tell you what kind of kits are available for this aircraft. So let's go have a look and see what we got.
The torpedo bomber saw its heyday during the Second World War, as well as very much mixed fortunes. In the right circumstances, it could be highly effective, such as with the Japanese B-5N bombers at Pearl Harbor. Torpedo aircraft could also make a decisive difference, such as when the Fleet Air Arms Fairey Swordfishes struck the German battleship Bismarck, damaging her rudder and allowing the Royal Navy to run her down. But the torpedo bomber was horribly exposed when faced with proper opposition. Well remembered is the attempted attack by Douglas Devastators on the Japanese fleet at the Battle of Midway in June 1942. The crews of these aircraft bravely pushed their attack, but were slaughtered by defensive fighters and fire.
Yeah, there's a very famous diorama by Shep Payne in 1/48 scale using the monogram kit. And in his description, he was saying he was putting the Devastator in its natural element, which was basically crashed into the water, shot down and crashed into the water. But let's continue.
Devastator is condemned by history as obsolete death traps. In fact, the lesson had already been demonstrated a few months earlier when the famed swordfishes that had thwarted the Bismarck were butchered trying to attack the German fleet dashing through the English Channel in February 1942. It's easy to look at both the Devastator and Swordfish, interestingly aircraft that have very different historical reputations, and think on their limitations. In fact, both were comparatively modern, if that's the right term, with the Swordfish entering service in 1936 and the Devastator only in 1937. But while these aircraft were fighting their desperate battles in the first half of 1942, another torpedo aircraft, one from an even earlier period, was throwing itself against the might of the Japanese Imperial Fleet. And its attacks, though not well remembered, must rank as some of the most desperate and bravest aerial actions of the entire war. The Vickers Vilderbeest. And yes, that's pronounced with a W. Apparently the V was a spelling error. This aircraft was designed to a 1924 Royal Air Force requirement for a land-based coastal defence plane that could utilise both torpedoes and bombs. When the prototype flew in 1928, it was a comparatively modern aircraft. The fuselage was of all-metal construction, with the biplane wings being unstaggered and fabric covered. Armament, which remained the same throughout the aircraft's lifespan, was a single fixed 303 Vickers machine gun forward firing and a 303 Lewis gun on a flexible mounting at the rear of the aircraft crew area.
Sorry, don't you like it when somebody comes to the door in the middle and when you're doing some work? Okay, where's the thing? All right, there we go.
Standard ordnance load was a single 18-inch aerial torpedo, or up to 1,100 pounds, that's 500 kilograms, of bombs. This first prototype, fitted originally with a Bristol Jupiter radial engine, was assessed by the RAF as an excellent aircraft, but suffered from vibration issues due to its power plant. Several other fits were trialled, and ultimately the first production model, the Vildebeest Mark I, was fitted with a Bristol Pegasus that produced 600 horsepower. The aircraft was first ordered in 1931, and a small run of 22 was made before 30 of an improved version, the Mark II,
I don't like the
were
nose on
ordered
it
in
now.
1943. Both of these early Marks were two-seat aircraft with the pilot's cockpit located just in front of the leading edge of the wings, while a rear gunner was located just behind the trailing edge. They also formed the basis for a new aircraft with a three-man crew to provide support to the British Army in Africa and the Middle East, the Vickers Vilderbeest. In 1932, the Vildebeest won its only non-Empire export when Spain bought a licence to build 25 which were fitted with a Hispano water-cooled inline engine. In 1935, the RAF began to receive the Mark III Vildebeest. This adopted the three-man crew of the Vincent, adding a navigator just in front of the rear gunner. Now, I'm a little uncertain on this, but I believe by this point the aircraft was now metal-skinned, including the wings. This is according to the website of the Air Force Museum of New Zealand. More on them to follow. Regardless, the Mark III was to be the primary production variant, with 162 built. This was followed by a small production run of 18 Mark IVs. These had a more powerful Bristol Perseus engine producing 825 horsepower with a Nacre cowling for streamlining, but suffered from overheating issues in hot climates and thus only served in the UK and New Zealand. As aero technology raced along in the 1930s, the Vildebeest's rather archaic appearance and stately performance meant they were outdated in a matter of years. As a result, they were rapidly sent off to the remoter corners of Britain's empire as new aircraft replaced them in Europe. And, like many other aircraft of their generation, they might have plodded around for a few years before ending up in scrapyards. But circumstances meant that the Vildebeest was to have a very busy end to its service life. The first to see action were the Spanish aircraft. These saw use with the Republican forces against the Nationalists as the Spanish Civil War raged between 1936 and 1939. Despite lacking bomb sites and proper hardpoints for the job, they were employed as bombers during the first months of the war. They did this by apparently having a third crew member throw bombs out of a hatch under the pilot's seat. Even though they were only a few years old, the Vildebeests were already badly out of date with performance that can only be described as stately, and so suffered heavily to nationalist fighters and air defences. Only two survived to the end of that war. The Vildebeest was obsolete throughout the Spanish Civil War, but served because there wasn't a lot of alternatives. But by the time it saw its next action, the aircraft was positively archaic. As said, with attention focused on the coming war in Europe and its eventual eruption, the Royal Air Force couldn't spare modern aircraft for the distant colonies. Vildebeests were dispatched to provide torpedo aircraft to areas that, in the late 1930s, weren't considered to be facing significant threat. So it was that two squadrons based in Singapore and Malaya, numbers 36 and 100 of the Royal Air Force, were equipped with Vickers Vilderbeests in December 1941 when the Japanese attacked. There was also a small detachment of 3 Vildebeests at Hong Kong, where they represented the primary offensive aerial weapon system for the colony, which pretty much sums up how low a priority Asia was to the British at the time. These were destroyed in bomb attacks on the first day. As a little historical aside, though Pearl Harbor is considered the start of the Pacific War, the Japanese had already shot down an RAF Catalina the day before when it spotted the Japanese invasion force heading for Malaya. Said invasion starting not quite an hour before the first wave hit Pearl Harbor. Anyway, the 2 Vildebeest squadrons on the Malay Peninsula had been expecting to receive Bristol Beaufort, but now had to go into action with their biplanes. It's easy to look at the Vildebeest, as many historians have, as some ancient dinosaur from a bygone era, which, to be fair, it pretty much was. In fact, the continued use of the Vildebeest perfectly demonstrates how fast aero technology had progressed throughout the 1930s. In 1942, the initial design was only 14 years old, and the Vildebeest Mark IIIs that numbers 36 and 100 squadrons were flying were only built 7 or 8 years before. But that span was enough for the Vildebeest to become horribly obsolescent. On paper, the aircraft had a top speed of only 143 miles per hour. Laden with 2,000 pounds of torpedo, It was much slower than that. Regardless, the wildebeests were thrown into action immediately, launching unsuccessful torpedo attacks against the invasion armada and its escort. They then continued to launch attacks against the Japanese as they marched down the peninsula towards Singapore. This was a bloody and expensive affair. In the face of Japanese army fighters such as the Nakajima Ki-27 and Ki-43, or the Navy's fearsome A6M-0, the wildebeests were largely sitting ducks. Even when fighter cover was available, they were still horribly exposed. Twice on the 26th of January 1942, wildebeests were dispatched to attack the Japanese landings at Endau, 250 miles north of Singapore. Of the 12 aircraft in the first wave, 5 were shot down. Of the 8 in the second attack, 6 were lost. On January 31st, the few survivors were withdrawn to the Dutch East Indies. Here they fought their last actions, with the type swan song occurring on February 28th. 9 wildebeests attacked the Japanese invasion fleet off Rembang, northern Java. This attack saw them claim to have torpedoed 8 ships, though again losses were heavy. In early March, the last 2 survivors in theatre tried to fly to Ceylon, now known as Sri Lanka. This rather desperate attempt came to naught when both aircraft ditched off the coast of Sumatra. That was the end of the wildebeest's combat record, hopelessly obsolete, but thrown into action in desperation and flown with immense courage. The last remaining wildebeests with the RAF were finally replaced in service later that month.
Immense courage. It's because of those guys. Those guys took off in those planes. No one never. They were not coming back. I mean, these guys had balls of steel. I'm sorry. It's like you ask anybody to do that today, they wouldn't. Well, I can't say that they wouldn't. There are still a few good men out there, but far fewer than they had back then. And we should always remember those guys who died on that day. All of them that died trying to keep us free.
When 273 Squadron on Ceylon swapped them with Fairy 4 miles, which by that point itself was obsolescent, but compared to the wildebeest must have seemed like a quantum leap. With that, the wildebeest largely passed into history. But now, one at least may be on the way back. The Royal New Zealand Air Force operated 39 wildebeests between 1935 and 1944. One of these, NZ-102, was scrapped in 1944, but luckily much of the parts remained in existence. These were recovered in 1972, and in 1986 came into the care of the Royal New Zealand Air Force Museum. They have been conducting a slow restoration, but now apparently are accelerating the process. So, with a bit of luck, if you are in Christchurch in a couple of years' time, you'll be able to see a Vickers Vilderbeest restored to its full and antiquated glory.
Now, speaking of the Royal New Zealand Air Force Museum and their wildebeest, I found videos. So we're going to go through, I'm going to go through it, give you the best pieces, because there's about 3. I don't know how long they are, but I'm going to chop them up a little bit, take out the boring bits and keep the interesting parts. So let's go and have a little look at it, shall we?
You join us here at the Air Force Museum of New Zealand's large constellation workshop. We're going to be talking for the next wee while about our...
I should fix that. I should pull myself up there. Okay, let's try this one again. Let's try this one again.
Large constellation workshop. We're going to be talking for the next wee while about our newest and probably most challenging project, the Vickers Vilderbeest. The Vickers Vilderbeest was a mid-1930s British designed large biplane aircraft, fairly typical of the types that were being designed around about that time. A large single engine biplane of all metal construction. So we're talking about that transitional period where wood and fabric were gradually being left behind and being replaced by new alloys and all metal aircraft designs. It's a very large biplane, 4 metres to the top of the top main plane, and carried a crew of 3. The Vickers Vilderbeest is a very significant aircraft in the history of New Zealand military aviation. It was the first fleet to be purchased new by the New Zealand government in the mid-1930s, and its arrival heralded a step change in how the RNZAF, or the fledgling RNZAF, went about its business. The aircraft's arrival necessitated the construction of new infrastructure, larger, newer hangars, and ground crew and crews, flight crews, had to be trained, of course, how to maintain and operate.
So you never think about when they buy these planes, they have to also have the
war biplanes
structure for it.
Type are extremely rare globally, and New Zealand actually is unique in having the privilege of being one of the very few places, if not the only place in the world, where you can find the remains of interwar biplanes of this type. Other types that the RNZF operated at the same time, the Blackburn Baffin and the Fairy Gordon, there are also remains of those aircraft in New Zealand. So as a national museum, we decided it was important that we do something with the structure that we have, even though from a curatorial and an engineering perspective it is quite a challenge. The structure that we have comes from a number of Vildebeest airframes, and indeed some parts also from Vickers Vilderbeest aircraft, a close relative of the Vildebeest that was also operated by the RNZAF. But the majority of the structure we know to be from NZ102, so that's the identity we've given the project. The museum first started to look at doing something with the Vildebeest almost 20 years ago. And some progress has been made in that time. You can see next to me here we have almost a complete fuselage frame, which shows beautifully the construction method that Vickers were using at the time. We have tubular framing, obviously wire braced, typical of aircraft of the period. And this amount of progress was achieved on and off over 20 years. It hasn't been a priority project, unfortunately, because we've had other major projects on the go, but we've decided to make it the centrepiece of what we're doing now and really focus on trying to move this forward.
Look at
that. Because of its significance and rarity. Well, the Vildebeest project has a number of challenges, not least of which the fact that we have no engineering drawings for the aircraft. As far as we can tell, and as best as our research has been able to find out, they haven't survived anywhere in the world. We are still hopeful that the Brooklands Museum in the UK, who hold the Vickers Company archive, may well come up with something from a significant amount of material that they have currently uncatalogued, but the chances are fairly slim. So, as you can imagine, trying to piece together an aircraft of this complexity and size without the drawings to guide you is quite a challenge. We are adopting a process of reverse engineering where we take wreckage similar to that you see here, and through painstakingly dismantling that wreckage, learning as much as we can about how to put the aircraft back together. It's a bit like having a 3,000 piece jigsaw puzzle and no box top photo to show you how it should go together. But we are taking the best conservation approach that we can. Every original piece that has structural integrity and can be reattached to the project will be. We are painstakingly removing every small bracket that we possibly can to reuse. And what we can't reuse, we're using to glean as much information we can about the types of material that we used and how the aircraft was put together. Vickers were using at the time an interesting tapered wedge method for connecting all of the main structural members, and we're having to make hundreds, if not thousands, of those tapered pins to put the structure together. And of course, as well as the technical challenges, There are the challenges around researching the history of the aircraft as well. And for the first time for us as a museum, we've taken the approach of putting together a multidisciplinary team where we have curators, researchers, technicians around the table contributing their input to the planning and execution of the project all at the same time, which really helps with that vital curator-conservator relationship that is so important for a successful outcome with projects like this. We've spent the last year assessing all of the structure that we have and trying to positively identify all of the parts of the airframe and work out which pieces have the potential to be reused in the rebuild and which pieces are beyond saving and really only a reference for patterns. The lack of engineering drawings has meant that this initial phase of the project has perhaps taken longer than it would have, but it's essential so that we really just know how much of a structurally sound airframe we have. Yeah, we have faced a couple of challenges that are directly relating to the global situation at the moment. We were hoping to import from the UK materials, imperial spec materials that would match as accurately as we possibly could the materials that were being used at the time in the Vildebeest. Things like the sheet aluminium for panels, the tubing. Unfortunately, the current situation with international shipping has made that very difficult and very costly. So the likelihood is that we're going to have to source the next closest equivalent spec of material probably from Australia or maybe the United States. It's one of those situations where you've got to be a little bit pragmatic. We would of course like to create and leave an aircraft that, for future generations to learn from, that represents very accurately the way that Vickers would have put one of these aircraft together back in the day. There are times when that's just not possible. Museums have a great opportunity with static restorations that they can pursue a more accurate line with construction methods and rigging methods that for flying aircraft today just wouldn't reach inspection standards or be permitted to fly. So we do want and hope to leave a very accurate technical record in the collection when we're finished. But as I say, sometimes you have to be pragmatic just to get the project moving. We are hoping, obviously, that by the end of the project timeline, which is currently 5 years, that we will have a complete airframe, fully rigged, fabric covered. But of course, with so many questions around whether we have enough reference material, there's no guarantee that we'll reach that outcome. So we've decided to have a number of go, no-go points along the way. When we get to the point that we have a fully skeletal airframe, we will hopefully by that point know whether we have enough information to take things to the next stage and consider installing systems and rigging to take things to the next step. If we don't, then we've decided that a skeletal airframe will make a fantastic exhibit and will link beautifully to a STEM program, for instance, where exposed aircraft structure is so useful, to talk about technology. As I said, it's 5 years at the moment. Anybody in the audience that's had anything to do with restorations will understand that these things rarely go to plan. So the timeline may well step out a bit further. And we may well pause the project at points where we hope that the research or the information we're getting from the public or from other institutions might catch up and just allow us to take things to that next step. So there you have a brief summary of our Vickers Vilderbeest project and the challenges that we're facing. It's an absolute privilege actually for myself and my colleagues to be involved in this kind of work and to be trying to deliver a project of such historic significance, not only to New Zealand, but as I said earlier, this will be the only type of this aircraft on display in a museum anywhere in the world when it's finished. So that really is something that we're really excited about. And we look forward to sharing progress and updates on our social media platforms and our website as things progress.
Okay, so I got a Vector Vincent's walk around, which is basically a wildebeest with different stuff in that. So it was the same aircraft, but it had a different function. So let's have a look at this one. These guys seem to be a lot further along than the other guys. I wonder if they communicate with one another. I wonder if they're working on the wings. Man, the stuff that they're making now, CNC machines and 3D printing does a lot of help in restoring aircraft these days. Now we got a little news story from New Zealand about the current situation on that wildebeest. So let's see what they have to say.
A group of Air Force veterans has been trying for years to rebuild an extremely rare World War II aircraft without the help of any plans. But a generous donation from a private collection could provide the guiding light they need. Ryan Boswell explains.
Tasked with almost an impossible mission,
a lot of these plates, they were corroded away completely.
Retired Air Force personnel are being called back for duty.
It's a never-ending job at the moment.
About 7 years.
Hoping they've still got the skills to piece together an extremely rare aircraft.
We're restoring what we believe is the last remaining Vickers Vilderbeest.
It was one of a dozen picked up by the Royal New Zealand Air Force in 1935 for training, general reconnaissance and coastal defence.
Prior to World War II, we had just under 1,000 people in the Air Force. At the end of World War II, we had 42,000, and a lot of the pilots that would have flown on the Vildebeest would then have gone over and flown in World War II as well.
For 20 years, this aircraft has sat at the National Air Force Museum in Christchurch, waiting for a blueprint. No plans have been found to help restore this lone survivor.
We've searched far and wide to see what we can find. So it's like having a Meccano set, 40,000 pieces, but you've got no idea how it goes together.
So this Vickers Vincent aircraft has been flown in on loan from a family collection in Auckland.
the two aircraft are like siblings. They've got a lot of similar DNA in the way they were constructed, so we can look at how they've approached and how they've constructed.
It's proving painstaking.
Most of them we have an original bit, because we don't have any drawings. It's making from originals what we can.
With no end in sight,
I don't think I'll see the end of it.
the plane will never take flight again. Its contribution will now be to show off an important part of history. Ryan Boswell, One News.
Now, in model kits, there's a few 1/72nd scale ones in mold injection, and there's a couple of kits that are vacuum formed in 1/48 scale. I think they're all 1/48 scale. Yeah, just checking my reference there. Okay. Now, as far as I'm concerned, Special Hobbies and Azure are basically the same company. And what they give you is all the marks of the Vildebeest, including the Spanish-built version in both land and floatplane version. Now, there's also an old Merlin kit of the Vildebeest, which, let's face it, is better off as a paperweight. But it is out there if you're up to the task. And what else do we have? Okay, now there's two kits in 1/48 scale. Both are vacuum formed. One is a Sager's kit in 1/48 scale. Another one is a Contrail kit. So there isn't really, like I said, there isn't very much in the way of 1/48 scale kits. There's lots of reference material, but no mold injected Vildebeest in 48 scale, which is odd. It's not odd, but it is odd because it's not a well-known. The history behind it is not well known, as you have found out, and not many people are interested in it. The 32nd scale, not even in vacuum form. But it wouldn't surprise me, some lady someplace in the world has built one in 1/32nd scale, though I have not found any online in my searches for reference material. But anyways, there you have it. The Vickers Vilderbeest. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video, and please remember to subscribe to my channel and punch that like button. You also can donate to my channel through my PayPal, which is on the main page of my channel, and you also can donate through Patreon. So, as always, every build is an adventure, so go make it awesome, and we'll see you again later, and you have a good day. Goodbye.